Today we're going to begin looking at the special senses. The special senses include the sense of olfaction, also known as the sense of smell, the sense of taste, which is perceived on the tongue and within the mouth, the visual system, which involves the eyes, and hearing and balance, which are perceived within the ears. Olfaction actually involves the binding of chemoreceptors to odorants present within the air within the olfactory epithelium. The olfactory epithelium is embedded in the superior aspect of the nasal cavity. So here's the entrance to the nose. This is the nasal cavity here. And the superior aspect of the nasal cavity, we actually have neurons that pass through the cribriform plate or olfactory plate into the nasal cavity, where we actually bind those odorants onto the neurons that will then give us our sense of smell. Now, there are really only 7 primary odorants recognized currently, but a person on average can actually smell around 4,000 different odors. A lot of this is around different proportions of these 7 primary odorants. And so if we have a really high concentration of one and a couple of low concentrations of another, it might indicate one smell, where we might have then a different high proportion of another odorant and smaller or medium levels of different odorants present within the air. Now, the olfactory neurons are these guys here, again embedded in that olfactory epithelium, and these are bipolar neuronal cells. So again, they have a single axon leaving the cell body, and then they have dendrites with enlarged ends called olfactory vesicles. On these olfactory vesicles, we actually will have cilia, very, very fine extensions of the plasma membrane designed to increase the surface area of the olfactory neurons. Now, the olfactory odorants actually bind into the mucus and dissolve in the mucus, and then they actually will then bind to the receptors on these olfactory neurons. This will stimulate depolarization, and the depolarization of the olfactory neurons will be conducted deeper, really to the olfactory bulb, where we have tufted cells and mitral cells, where we get our first synapse. Olfactory epithelium is constantly being replaced, and this is because it comes in contact with many different odorants and particles within the air. So the olfactory epithelium is actually replaced about every 2 months. The only other place that this really takes place with neurons is actually within the mouth, and so we end up with the mouth and the nose being unique in the fact that they have the ability to replace. So within this nasal cavity, again, these are the bipolar cells that are actually going to be replaced, but they are actually within that pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium that is going to allow for movement of mucus along here, and we can get an idea that these are columnar-like cells adjacent to it. So if we look at again where the nerves actually run, we have the olfactory nerves extending through the cribriform plate, right? Here's the cribriform plate that we learned in the bony anatomy. That olfactory epithelium, where we actually have the dendrites extending into the nasal cavity here. Once those nerves, the bipolar cells, extend through the cribriform plate, they synapse here in the olfactory bulb, highlighted here, and then those mitral cells will actually send axons back towards the olfactory areas of the brain via the olfactory tract, which is really cranial nerve 1. So if we look at how binding of odorants occurs to cause depolarization, we start with a protein embedded in the membrane of the bipolar cells, and we end up with the odorant actually binding to that receptor, and attached to the receptor is a G protein. Now the G protein has multiple subunits. One of the ones here, this is the alpha subunit. When we get that odorant binding, they will have a change in conformation of the G protein, and the alpha subunit will actually dissociate. Now the alpha unit dissociates and actually attaches itself to adenylate cyclase. Adenylate cyclase actually will convert ATP to cyclic AMP. The cyclic AMP starts to build up, and it will actually then bind to the inside part of an ion channel. Now these are generally for sodium or calcium, but either way the cyclic AMP binds, we open the channel and the ions, sodium or calcium, will actually be allowed to enter the cell. At this point, because this is a positively charged ion, it will allow for depolarization of the inside of the cell to take place, the inside becoming more positive. If we have a significant amount of this odorant, again, it will reach threshold and actually cause an action potential. So if we look at, again, the olfactory epithelium, we've got our bipolar cells, again, extending through the cribriform plate with its axons, and we get our synapses onto the mitral and the tufted cells. These cells will then send signals actually down through the olfactory tract back towards the olfactory cortex in the frontal lobe. Now, one of the unique things about the sense of olfaction is that the olfactory cortex, or the olfactory sense, does not go through the thalamus. And the thalamus is actually a routing center that helps to send information about the senses that we are getting and route them to the appropriate part of the cortex. But it also helps to process and also limit some of those signals getting to the cortex for processing. Now, this means that it has a very, very strong sense of awareness, but it also will have an effect in terms of its ability to stimulate regardless of or with minimal amount of processing. So we have three areas that the olfactory cortex is really involved. We have the lateral olfactory area, which actually is going to be giving our conscious sense of smell. We have the medial olfactory area, which gives us more of emotional reactions, but also kind of visceral things that might make us want to gag, retch, etc. And then we have the intermediate olfactory area, and this is actually an area that helps to modify incoming senses of smell, mostly in terms of adaptation. So once we've had a sense of smell, we tend to actually lessen that odorant, or lessen that perception of sense of smell, so because our body is already aware of it. I like to think of this in terms of if you live in a house with cats, you have this smell in your home of the cat box, etc., that can be of varying levels depending on, obviously, of course, on how dirty it is. But if you're used to that smell, you're not going to be in tune with that sense of smell. Now, you can be readjusted to it. If you leave the house for a couple of hours, you come away, and then you come back into the house, all of a sudden you're going to be able to sell that smell of the cat box, the urine smell that is pungent in the air. But again, after 10 minutes, an hour, that sense of the smell of the cat box will actually disappear. This also explains where you come into a friend's house, they might not smell something in their home, but you are more aware of it because your sensory olfactory neurons have not adapted to that sense of smell. So if we look at the route again, we start again here at the olfactory neurons. Within that nasal cavity, we have our bipolar cells. They synapse up into the olfactory bulb, and again, really we get the mitral cells are the major ones that are sending back information towards the olfactory cortex. Now, information goes three different places. The first one, the lateral olfactory cortex. This is again going to be our conscious sense of smell. We have the medial olfactory cortex, this area right in here, which is going to give us more of our visceral or emotional reactions. And then we have our intermediate area. And this intermediate area, again, is going to be having effects from our conscious perception, actually affecting information processing here, but then we actually will send neurons out towards the olfactory bulb, which will allow us to adapt, or essentially decrease that perception, or decrease the responsiveness of certain cells to a specific sense of smell.